A lot of your book's ambiance comes from how you decide to tell the story. You can use several different perspectives, like Colfer's Artemis Fowl series, or you can limit yourself to one, like Shelby Bach does with the Ever Afters. But you also have to decide what point of view you're going to use. So, here's a quick rundown. First-person point of view is told not just from the perspective of your character, but in her head and through her eyes we hear her thoughts. The reader sees what the character sees and what she's thinking. I tiptoed down the hall, trying not to wake my roommates. The last thing I wanted tonight was to explain where I'd been. In second person, the author speaks directly to the reader, who in effect becomes the main character. This is frequently used in such books as Choose Your Own Adventure, and is a particularly difficult skill to use successfully and convincingly. You tiptoed down the hall trying not to wake your roommates. The last thing you wanted to do was explain where you'd been tonight. The disadvantage with both of these is that you are confined to the perspective and thoughts of a single character. What the character doesn't know, the reader can't know, and so it does limit your storytelling capabilities. You with me so far? Alright, this is where things start to get a little complicated. Third person is also called third person limited, and Solstein and John Gardner of The Art of Fiction agree that it is best understood as a mere change from the first person I to he. This, while still telling things from a specific character's perspective, is outside of his head, not in it. Everything should still sound like something the character would say. Josephine tiptoed down the hall, trying not to wake her roommates. The last thing she wanted to do tonight was explain where she'd been. This has much the same drawbacks as first and second person, though you are allowed a little leeway, because you aren't actually inside the character's head, so you don't necessarily have to witness specific thoughts for every single event. Omniscient, also called third-person omniscient, is all-knowing. It allows you to get inside the heads of multiple characters throughout the story and even within the same scene. This is called head jumping and can be extremely confusing to the reader. It takes some skill to master without completely confusing your audience. If you're interested in reading a good example of this, I would recommend picking up Artemis Fowl by Owen Colfer. He's very good at writing this, plus it's a really good book. According to The Art of Fiction by John Gardner, this POV is told by an unknown narrator, a persona of the author who subtly directs you towards the scenes and the moments that you need to witness and disappears when he's not needed. However, the author might also choose to employ the not-so-subtle narrator to tell his story, such as Lemony Snicket in A Series of Unfortunate Events, or the unknown narrator in Christopher Healy's Hero's Guide series, or my particular favorite, the literal narrator in the Simon Bloom series by Michael Reisman. An omniscient or narrator point of view could decide to say something that the character themselves might not. Josephine tiptoed down the hall like a teenager after curfew. This description is tighter, but it also might not be something that Josephine herself would say. Maybe she would think of it more along the lines of a spy in enemy territory. An advantage with the omniscient point of view is that we could take a look at one of Josephine's roommates in this same scene if it pertains to the story. Cheryl watched Josephine's shadow creep past her door and grinned. There was definitely a story to pry out of her roomie tomorrow. You have to be careful, however, that you don't break POV. This is usually easy to identify in first or second person. Anything that your focal character doesn't know, the reader shouldn't know either. Here's an example from my own story that is told in the first person. Harold didn't care. His day suddenly became a lot more interesting. He strutted onward, gloating over the idea he'd been accosted by a drug addict. Now, my main character is not Harold. There is no way that Rodney could know this is what Harold is thinking. I have broken my POV by informing the reader of what is going on inside Harold's head. But if I were to replace it with something like this, Harold didn't care. Apparently, being accosted by a medicated wacko made his day a lot more interesting. He strutted onward, probably already spinning the idea to sound more daring and impressive when he told his cohorts. This not only keeps the reader in Rodney's point of view, but it also sounds a lot more like his voice, as opposed to the previous example, which sounded quite a bit like Harold. Breaking POV in third person is much the same as it is with the first and second, and with omniscient, it's often viewed as author intrusion. Author intrusion is what happens when you, the writer, overstep your bounds, and you start talking about something that doesn't relate to the story or shouldn't be known from your story's perspective. This can be manifested in several ways. Taking the reader to an aside that doesn't pertain to the storyline, or taking such an adamant or stringent stand on a certain political or religious view that it goes from being a characteristic to an indoctrination. There are some more great examples of author intrusion linked below because we are out of time for today. In the next video, we'll be talking about the necessary evil of cutting scenes, no matter how painful. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss it.